There exists, in the liminal space between hearts, an agreement written in invisible ink, a covenant sealed not with words, but with the silent understanding that certain boundaries must never be crossed, certain truths must never be spoken, certain lights must never shine too brightly, lest they reveal the comfortable darkness in which the circle has chosen to dwell. She enters these sacred circles with the innocence of the seeker, believing she has found her tribe, her sisters, her spiritual family. The warmth of belonging wraps around her like a familiar shawl, and she mistakes this initial comfort for the deepness of authentic connection. Yet beneath the surface, pleasantries and shared confidences, beneath the ritual of complaint and the communion of mutual support, lies something far more complex, a psychological ecosystem built not on the celebration of each soul's unique flowering, but on the mutual agreement to remain within the garden walls of familiar limitation. The invisible covenant reveals itself slowly, like the gradual recognition of prison bars that were always there but painted to look like safety. It speaks in the language of concern when she mentions new dreams, in the subtle shift of energy when she shares unexpected joy, in the carefully constructed silences that follow her reports of inner transformation. The covenant whispers, "Remain as you are, for we have built our identity around your wounds, our comfort around your struggles, our sense of purpose around your need for our particular form of salvation." This is the paradox of the feminine friendship circle. It offers sanctuary while demanding sacrifice, provides belonging while requiring the abandonment of authentic becoming. The soul that seeks growth within such circles soon discovers that the very bonds she cherishes are forged in the fires of mutual limitation, tempered by the shared agreement to find comfort in collective stagnation rather than courage in individual evolution. The covenant's most seductive power lies in its disguise as love. It masquerades as care when it questions her newfound strength, as wisdom when it warns her against hope, as protection when it encourages her to return to the familiar territory of old complaints and inherited wounds. She learns that this circle's definition of friendship requires not the celebration of transformation, but its gentle, loving suppression. In the beginning, she mistakes the reflection for reality, believing that the wounds she sees mirrored in her friends' eyes are universal truths rather than shared limitations, that the familiar patterns of disappointment and resignation echoing through their conversations are wisdom rather than collective trance. Each gathering becomes a ritual of mutual validation, where pain is currency and healing is somehow betrayal of the bonds that bind them together in sacred suffering. The mirror shows her what she expects to see, that men are inherently unreliable, that dreams are dangerous delusions, that settling for less is mature acceptance rather than unconscious surrender. Within this hall of distorting mirrors, each woman's individual wound becomes amplified and sanctified through repetition, transformed from personal injury into universal law. The echo chamber resonates with the comfortable rhythms of familiar complaint, creating a hypnotic environment where questioning the shared narrative feels like questioning reality itself. Yet mirrors have a peculiar property. They can only reflect what is brought before them. When she begins to carry different energies, to embody new possibilities, to heal what others still embrace as permanent fixtures of feminine experience, the reflection shifts and the comfortable illusion begins to crack. The wounds that once felt like shared identity now reveal themselves as choices. The limitations that seemed like immutable reality now appear as collective agreements that can be dissolved. She watches as friends who once celebrated her strength now question her sanity, as those who once supported her dreams now warn her of inevitable disappointment. The mirror of collective wounds cannot reflect her growing wholeness without revealing the fractured nature of the friendships themselves. built as they were on the foundation of mutual brokenness rather than the celebration of individual healing and conscious evolution toward authentic power. The ego, that masterful architect of psychological survival, weaves itself so intricately into the fabric of female friendship that untangling personal identity from group dynamics becomes an act of sacred rebellion. Within these circles, each woman's ego has found its perfect niche: the wounded healer who gives endlessly to avoid her own depths, the wise advisor who counsels others to avoid facing her own unresolved questions, the eternal optimist who maintains hope for everyone except herself. These roles become psychological prisons disguised as purpose, identity cages that feel like calling. When she begins to transcend the comfortable boundaries of her assigned role, the collective ego of the friendship experiences her growth as existential threat. Her healing implies that healing is possible. Her strength suggests that victimhood is choice. Her transformation whispers that the group's shared limitations are not immutable laws, but unconscious agreements that can be dissolved through individual courage. The friendship's ego structure requires her to remain predictably wounded, reliably small, consistently available to reflect back the familiar pain that has become each woman's secret identity. She discovers that her friends' egos have developed a strange dependency, not on her happiness, but on her participation in the shared mythology of feminine struggle. Her joy becomes a judgment of their sorrow, her peace an indictment of their chaos, her growing self-love a mirror that reveals their own self-abandonment. The collective ego cannot tolerate the presence of what it has deemed impossible, and so it begins the subtle work of undermining her transformation through questions disguised as care, warnings dressed as wisdom, and withdrawal presented as disappointed love. The ecosystem of mutual smallness depends on each woman remaining within her prescribed limitations, and her emergence beyond these boundaries threatens to collapse the entire psychological architecture that has provided meaning, purpose, and identity for the group's shared unconscious patterns. In the shadow realm, beneath sisterhood's luminous surface, dwells the ancient feminine wound, the primal rivalry that civilization taught women to bury so deep that it now expresses itself through the most sophisticated forms of disguised sabotage. This shadow speaks in the language of concern when it seeks to diminish, whispers warnings when it fears being surpassed, offers advice that serves to maintain the speaker's position rather than support the listener's evolution. The very women who claim to celebrate her success become unconscious agents of her limitation, their own disowned competitive instincts finding expression through questions that poison confidence and observations that plant seeds of doubt. She begins to recognize the shadow's signature in the subtle shift of energy when she shares good news, in the way conversations pivot away from her victories toward others' struggles, in the careful construction of responses that acknowledge her growth while simultaneously undermining its foundation. The competitive shadow reveals itself as the collective feminine wound that makes women suspicious of each other's power, threatened by each other's light, and unconsciously committed to a hierarchy where only one woman at a time is permitted to shine, while others must remain in comfortable darkness. This shadow competition operates through the most exquisite psychological mechanisms. The friend who highlights every potential danger in her new relationship while claiming protective love. The sister who questions her career advancement while professing only concern for her well-being. The confidant who subtly reminds her of past failures precisely when she needs encouragement for future possibilities. The shadow's genius lies in its ability to dress destruction as devotion, to present sabotage as sisterhood, to offer poison as medicine. The awakening woman learns to recognize this shadow not as personal failing, but as collective inheritance. The wound that makes women believe there is not enough room in the world for all to flourish, that one woman's rising requires another's falling, that authentic power is finite resource rather than infinite possibility. The mask she wears within. Her friendship circle has been so carefully crafted, so perfectly fitted to the group's expectations, that she has forgotten the face beneath, the true countenance of her authentic self that existed before she learned to perform acceptability. This persona, born from early wounds around belonging and shaped by countless moments of adapting herself to maintain connection, has become both protective armor and psychological prison, allowing her entry into the sacred circle while denying her the possibility of genuine intimacy. The good friend persona demands constant vigilance, the perpetual monitoring of her responses to ensure they align with group expectations, the careful editing of her experiences to fit the narrative of struggle that bonds the circle together, the conscious suppression of her expanding joy lest it threaten others' comfort with their chosen limitations. She becomes an actress in her own life, performing the role of who she thinks she must be to maintain the love she fears losing if her authentic self were ever fully revealed. Within this performance, her growing strength becomes a secret she must hide, her healing a shame she must disguise, her transformation a betrayal she must minimize. The persona requires her to celebrate others' growth while downplaying her own, to offer endless support while pretending not to need reciprocal nourishment, to maintain the illusion of mutual equality while carefully concealing the expansion of her consciousness that threatens to reveal the artificial nature of the bonds themselves. The tragedy of the friendship persona lies not in its initial necessity, for all souls require safe harbor while learning to navigate the treacherous waters of early relationship, but in its gradual crystallization into permanent identity. What began as adaptive strategy becomes psychological straitjacket. What started as protective measure transforms into barrier against the very authenticity that could create genuine connection. She realizes that she has traded her true self for a carefully constructed image, designed to maintain relationships that can only love her projection, never her essence. There exists a hypnotic state so pervasive within feminine circles that it masquerades as normal consciousness, a collective trance where suffering becomes the sacred currency of connection, where victimhood transforms from temporary experience into permanent identity, where the mutual exchange of powerlessness creates the illusion of profound intimacy while actually preventing the vulnerable authenticity that could birth genuine transformation. She awakens gradually to the realization that these friendship circles operate as shared hypnotic environments where each woman's story of limitation reinforces another's, where complaints become prayers in a religion of resignation, where the ritual sharing of disappointments serves to maintain everyone's commitment to the belief that life is inherently disappointing. The trance speaks in unison. This is simply how things are for women. This is the price of being feminine in a world that does not understand our sensitivity. This is the burden we must bear together in sacred sisterhood. Within this collective hypnosis, any attempt to question the fundamental assumptions becomes an act of betrayal, not just of the individual friendships, but of the entire feminine mythology that holds the group together. When she begins to wake from the trance, to recognize her own power, to create rather than merely endure, to see possibilities where others see only limitations, her emerging consciousness becomes a threat to the collective agreement that keeps everyone safely unconscious. The trance maintains itself through sophisticated psychological mechanisms, the immediate rush to comfort when someone experiences success that might inspire dangerous hope, the collective wisdom that discourages risk-taking while encouraging safe suffering, the shared language that frames growth as selfishness and healing as abandonment of solidarity. She discovers that this trance has been so pervasive so seemingly natural, that questioning it feels like questioning the very ground beneath her feet. Yet consciousness, once awakened, cannot return to sleep without profound violence against the soul's natural movement toward wholeness and authentic expression of its inherent power. The soul that begins to outgrow its friendship circle enters the sacred desert, that necessary wilderness where old connections must die before new forms of relationship can be born, where the familiar voices of external validation fade into silence so that the authentic voice within can finally be heard above the chorus of others' expectations and limitations. This is the loneliness that precedes all genuine transformation, not the hollow emptiness of isolation, but the pregnant solitude of chrysalis, where what she has been dissolves in the mysterious alchemy of becoming who she truly is. The friends who once seemed essential to her survival now feel like echoes from a former life, their concerns and conversations flowing past her like distant radio signals from a frequency she no longer receives with the same clarity or urgent need. She grieves not only the loss of familiar companionship, but the death of the version of herself that required these particular bonds to feel acceptable, worthy, complete. This grief is holy work, the conscious mourning of an identity that served its purpose, but can no longer contain the expanding essence of who she is becoming. The young woman who needed others' approval to feel real is dying, and with her death comes the birth of one who generates her own validation from the inexhaustible well of authentic self-relationship. In this sacred loneliness, she learns that emergence is not abandonment but evolution, not rejection but natural progression, beyond forms that once nourished but now constrain. The silence teaches her to distinguish between the voice of authentic guidance and the echoes of others' projections, between the wisdom of her own depths and the inherited beliefs that once masqueraded as truth. This solitary passage becomes her spiritual initiation, the courageous descent into her own depths that reveals the treasures buried beneath years of adaptation and performance. She discovers that the love she once sought from others was always available within, that the acceptance she craved from friendship circles was her birthright to claim from her own consciousness, that the belonging she feared losing was never dependent on external validation, but on her willingness to come home to herself. Jung knew that the individuated soul, the one who has dared to become authentic rather than acceptable, poses an existential threat to the collective sleep that most friendships use as foundation. Her very presence becomes a living reminder of what lies dormant within others, her transformation a mirror reflecting back the unlived potential that her friends have chosen to keep safely buried beneath layers of familiar limitation and comfortable resignation. She discovers that her emerging authenticity functions as an unwelcome alarm clock in a room full of sleepers who have made peace with their dreams of smallness. Her joy suggests that depression is not inevitable. Her peace implies that chaos is choice. Her growing self-love whispers the heretical truth that external validation was never necessary for internal wholeness. Each moment of her genuine happiness becomes an unconscious judgment of others' commitment to suffering. Each step of her evolution a walking testament to possibilities they have declared impossible. The friendship group experiences her individuation as collective betrayal, not because she has abandoned them, but because her very existence challenges the fundamental assumptions upon which their shared reality has been constructed. If she can heal what they have deemed unhealable, if she can transcend what they have accepted as permanent limitation, if she can create what they have resigned themselves to living without, then their own choices to remain within familiar boundaries are revealed as choices rather than unavoidable fate. This natural selection process becomes inevitable. The relationships built on mutual unconsciousness cannot survive the presence of awakening consciousness without either evolving or dissolving. Her individuated presence demands that others either rise to meet her at her new level of authentic being or retreat into the safety of connections that require no growth, no risk, no confrontation with their own unlived possibilities. The threat she poses is not intentional cruelty, but the organic consequence of becoming real in a world that often prefers the predictable comfort of shared illusion. In the sacred laboratory of solitude, she must learn the ancient art of befriending the very essence that others could not love, turning toward herself with the same curiosity, compassion, and celebration she once offered so freely to those who ultimately could not receive her authentic radiance. This alchemy of self-friendship transforms the lead of loneliness into the gold of sovereign wholeness, where external abandonment becomes the catalyst for internal integration. The laboratory reveals its secret slowly, that the acceptance she sought from others was always available from her own consciousness, that the understanding she craved from friendship circles existed in infinite abundance within her own depths, that the celebration of her authentic nature was not dependent on others' capacity to recognize her worth, but on her willingness to acknowledge her own inherent value. Each day of solitude becomes an experiment in self-love, each moment of silence an opportunity to hear the voice that was always speaking beneath the noise of others' expectations. She learns to court herself with the same devotion she once brought to external relationships, listening to her own needs with the attention she gave to others' concerns, honoring her own rhythms with the respect she offered to friends' limitations, celebrating her own victories with the enthusiasm she reserved for others' achievements. The internal beloved emerges as both lover and friend, offering unconditional presence while supporting her continued evolution rather than requiring her diminishment. This alchemical process reveals that the loneliness she feared was actually freedom in disguise, that the isolation she dreaded was the spaciousness necessary for authentic self-discovery. In learning to be her own best friend, she creates the template for all future relationships, the foundation of self-love that allows her to connect with others from wholeness rather than need, from celebration rather than desperation, from authentic choice rather than unconscious compulsion, to maintain familiar patterns that no longer serve her soul's natural movement toward conscious expression of its inherent magnificence. From the ashes of outgrown friendships, like phoenixes emerging from the flames of necessary destruction, arise the women who have also walked through the fire of their own psychological depths and emerged capable of celebrating rather than fearing each other's authentic power. These are the sisters born not from shared wounds, but from shared courage, the courage to face their own shadows, to question their inherited limitations, to choose growth over comfort, even when the price was temporary isolation from the collective. Trance of feminine victimhood. The Phoenix Circle operates by entirely different laws than the friendship formations she once knew. Here, each woman's transformation is celebrated as gift rather than threat. Each soul's expansion creates more space for others' growth rather than triggering competitive contraction. Each individual's healing contributes to the collective elevation, rather than exposing the group's commitment to familiar suffering. These are the relationships that emerge when women have learned to generate their own validation, to create their own meaning, to find their own wholeness before seeking completion through external connection. In conscious sisterhood, vulnerability becomes strength rather than manipulation. Authenticity replaces performance, and individual sovereignty enhances rather than threatens collective harmony. The women who gather in these Phoenix circles have each paid the price of temporary isolation to maintain their integrity, have chosen the courage of solitary growth over the comfort of unconscious belonging, have learned that true friendship celebrates evolution rather than requiring stagnation. She recognizes these conscious sisters by their capacity to hold paradox, to offer support without attempting rescue, to provide wisdom without imposing limitation, to maintain connection, while honoring each soul's unique journey toward wholeness. In their presence, she experiences the profound relief of being seen and celebrated for who she is becoming, rather than cherished for who she was before her transformation began to threaten the sleeping beauty of collective unconsciousness. The mature soul learns to hold both realities simultaneously: the genuine love that existed within the outgrown friendships and the necessary liberation that required their release, the gratitude for what was shared and the clarity about what could no longer be sustained without betraying her own evolutionary imperative. This integration becomes a sophisticated psychological achievement, requiring her to honor the beauty of what was while not sacrificing what is becoming on the altar of nostalgic loyalty or guilt-driven attachment. She develops the capacity to bless her former friends while maintaining boundaries that protect her continued growth, to hold appreciation for the safety those relationships once provided while not returning to the psychological cage they now represent. This is not the cold detachment of superiority, but the warm wisdom of someone who understands that different souls are called to different depths, that not all relationships are meant to survive every transformation, that love sometimes requires letting go rather than holding on. The integration teaches her that outgrowing is not rejection, but natural progression. Like the butterfly emerging from chrysalis, she cannot return to being caterpillar without destroying the very essence of what she has become. Some friendships were always meant to be chapters rather than entire volumes, sacred containers for specific phases of growth that must be honored for their gift while not being forced beyond their natural lifespan through guilt or obligation. She learns to carry forward the gold from each relationship while leaving behind the dross, to treasure the memories that nourished her soul while releasing the dynamics that required her diminishment. This mature integration allows her to approach all future connections with both open heart and clear boundaries, capable of deep intimacy while maintaining the sovereignty that honors both her own growth and others' freedom to choose their own relationship with transformation and conscious evolution. The woman who emerges from this sacred fire carries within her heart a new quality of presence, the sovereignty of one who has learned to navigate feminine friendship from the integrated wholeness of her authentic self rather than from the wounds and projections that once guided her desperate search for belonging. She has become the conscious friend, the sovereign sister, one who can offer her presence as gift rather than strategy, her support as celebration rather than obligation, her love as blessing rather than bargain. This is the enantiodromia Jung spoke of, the complete reversal where what once felt like loss reveals itself as gain, where apparent endings become mysterious beginnings, where the pattern of outgrowing friendships transforms from unconscious wound into conscious choice. She no longer attracts relationships that require her diminishment because she no longer carries the frequency of one who believes diminishment is the price of love. The sovereign heart operates by different laws, drawing toward itself only those connections that can celebrate expansion rather than demanding contraction. She learns to recognize the difference between friendships that support her continued evolution and those that require her return to familiar limitation, between sisters who can meet her at her current level of consciousness and those who need her to remain where they feel comfortable. This discernment becomes not judgment but wise navigation, not superiority but clarity about which relationships serve the highest good of all involved. The sovereign friend offers her presence without attachment to outcome, her wisdom without need for validation, her love without requirement for reciprocal diminishment. She has learned that the greatest gift she can offer other women is not the comfort of shared limitation, but the living example of what becomes possible when a woman chooses her own psychological evolution over the security of remaining small enough to fit within others' comfort zones.